Cedar Point is the mecca of roller coaster fans all over the country, with 17 coasters crammed onto a tiny peninsula in Lake Erie. But they have one major problem that has plagued them for the past 20 years. And that problem? Space. Cedar Point is situated on a 364-acre plot of land on a peninsula in Sandusky, Ohio. This plot of land puts them in line in terms of size with Kings Island, Six Flags Great America, and Epcot, which isn't small by the standards of many other theme parks, but also differs from some parks like Disney World Parks and Kings Island because it has a particular feature that some other parks don't have. And that feature is water. Cedar Point's surrounded on all sides by water, effectively making it an island. See, the problem is that Cedar Point has no more space to build new rides, especially roller coasters, which is how they got their name. And so, there is no way that they can expand their lineup of rides to solidify their place as a destination for roller coaster fans around the world without making a sacrifice first. We've seen this time and time again, with Disaster Transport being removed to bring a gatekeeper, Valraven being built where the Good Time Theater was, or most recently, Wild Mouse taking over the former home of the Wicked Twister. See, when you can't expand outward, you only have two options. You can either not build anything new, or you can pay for things you already have to build new experiences for your guests. Cedar Point can't remain a leader in their attractions by opting not to build, so they're only really left with one choice. Pick the least popular attraction at the time, take that one out to make room for the new stuff. Okay, now cue the Matrix music. But what if I told you that there was an option to make it so they didn't have to do this? What if I told you that they could expand the park outside of its current physical limitations? And what if I told you there's multiple paths that they could take to do this? We're going to cover a number of concepts about the ways that Cedar Point could take the land that they own and really maximize it, ranging from very realistic options to completely outlandish and incredibly expensive endeavors. Which of these options is the realistic one? I don't know. I'm just an internet dude. I don't know how much this stuff costs. Before we begin examining what options the park has to expand their size, we first have to understand the overall layout of what Cedar Point is. The park's located on a plot of land that, while technically it's a peninsula, is much closer to an island. It's about 1.5 miles long and 1/3 of a mile wide, and there's only two ways to get onto the peninsula. The first being Cedar Point Road, otherwise known to the locals as the Chaussee. In the past, this used to be the primary entrance to Cedar Point. However, with hundreds of homes located on the shores of the lake alongside this road, and traffic becoming an increasing problem for the residents of the area, Cedar Point Road was eschewed in favor of Cedar Point Drive, which is a 4-lane entrance into the park, which now serves as the park's primary entrance. In between these two parks is a bay, meaning that the park is surrounded practically on all sides by water. On the south side of the park is the parking lot, with a road leading up to the west side of the peninsula, extending around the west side into the north side of the park, with the Lighthouse Point Campground and Cedar Point Shores on the north. Hotel Breakers is just east of that. In this sense, the park itself is somewhat sandwiched on all sides, with the marine on the west, parking lot on the south, campground, water park, and hotel on the north and northeast. But remember what we said before about Cedar Point's expansion options? They could either do nothing or pave over something else. So, Cedar Point's marina allows boat owners to dock their boats as close as possible to the action, giving people the option to make a day out of boating into Cedar Point's marina, docking their boat, and hopping right off the boat and into the park. Now you might be saying, that seems like a really cool idea. We shouldn't get rid of that. And I would agree. I think the prospect of having this method of entering the park makes it an entirely unique experience to Cedar Point. The only other parks that offer an experience like this, to my knowledge, are some of Disney's parks, and their docks aren't open to general boat owners. They're only open to Disney's boats. So I think having this option to enter the park off of your boat is such a unique experience to Cedar Point that it sets an incredible precedent for what kind of environment the park is. One that's really relaxed, carefree, and the perfect Saturday activity. So this is actually something I love having along the west side of the peninsula, and I actually would love to keep. However, what I'd really like to do is re-examine a few aspects of this experience and see if we can't tie it in better with the overall park experience that we want to create. See, there's a few problems with this currently. The first is that there are people who permanently dock their boats here. This means that they can take their boat from Cedar Point to other places in the water, and when they do, they need to park their car near the dock. Because of this, it leads to a decent amount of parking spaces being placed on the west side of the peninsula, mostly dedicated to the marina. Secondly, the marina is home to 2 restaurants, Famous Dave's Barbecue and Bay Harbor. These are great sit-down dining restaurants that are known for having great food. And what's the problem with that? Well, these restaurants are designed for people who are utilizing the marina, meaning that the only way for park goers to visit these places is to actually exit the park and go across the street into the marina. Regardless, there's a non-insignificant amount of land that Cedar Point could make use of in this area. So, with those problems in mind, how could we expand the park? In my mind, the first step is to limit the number of parking spaces for permanently docked boats in the marina. The chances of most of these boaters needing access to their boats at the same time is minimal. And in the event it is necessary, they could be provided with other parking options that could alleviate some of the stress, such as being able to park in the employee parking lot, or in the regular lot with a quick walk or even a shuttle over to the marina. As it currently stands, it seems that these parking lots are mostly used by employees of the park anyway. Instead, we can make it so that the marina ramps lead into a pathway that ends with a park entrance. This new entrance format would re-envision the concept of Cedar Point Marina from being just a regular marina with an amusement park across the road into an actual portal into like the world of Cedar Point. When I think of this concept, I'm most reminded of Epcot's Skyliner and how it enters directly into the park and serves as a specialized entrance that drops you into a totally unique place in the park. It's a unique experience that only Skyliner riders get to experience. I think this could be very similar, where only marina users would get the experience of entering the park in this unique way. I think this would be a great opportunity to tie the 2 restaurants much more into the park's repertoire at the same time. One of Cedar Point's big flaws is the lack of food options that allow park goers to actually sit down and enjoy a meal together. So here's the basic concept. We're losing the parking lot, making a unique way to enter the park, and seamlessly making 2 restaurants a natural experience as Cedar Point's dining options. But what are we doing with all that space? Cedar Point's number 2 problem has always been a major struggle with theming. I think this presents a great opportunity to build onto some of the existing characteristics of theming that already have in Frontier Town by doing a similar but wholly distinct theme for this area and calling it something like Pirates Bay. It plays into the fact that there's a marina attached to the area, and with that in mind, let's start building what this area could look like. The area could have 3 primary entrances. The first is the marina, which could be on the cul-de-sac area of the parking lot near the Bay Harbor restaurant. And the second is the existing street crossing near Valraven, and the third could be a new entrance set off the backstage area between Valraven and the railroad. I think this is a great area for a new entrance, as it currently only serves as a place for food trucks to park. And I think having it border the entrance to the railroad is a great way to tie it into the Pirates Bay theme, since a small bayside town might have something like a railroad on its outskirts. Without going into detail about every little thing that can go into this park, let's simply cover some of the basics. Ocean Motion has been a staple of Cedar Point for over 40 years. However, it stands alone in the park as it doesn't have any similar rides neighboring it. And its theming is totally unique to the rest of the park. So I think it would actually fit in fantastically to have Ocean Motion moved from its current area into this new area. In addition to that, I think there's a huge amount of space for 2 new ride experiences. One that could be an out and back coaster that extends up the portion of the marina's bay, similar to the way that Magnum hugs the edge of the peninsula. The other could be a small family coaster or a larger thrill ride. Since the current home for food trucks would be removed to make room for the entrance to this area, I think there could be a cool area coming out of this entrance extending into the main area called like the Black Market or something similar, where it could feel like a seedy back street market and the food trucks could blend in very well as a part of that experience. Throw in a new bar as well as a shop or 2 and you have a very compelling and well-themed area. It's no secret that anywhere you have a lot of people in the US, you're going to have a lot of cars. But it's also no secret that parking takes up an insane amount of space. Cedar Point's no exception. The main entrance parking lot takes up a massive amount of space. From what I'm estimating, around 20% of the total size of the peninsula. When you put that into perspective, it becomes immediately evident that if Cedar Point was to try and expand the park, turning the parking lot into park space is the obvious choice. But if you eliminate lots of parking lot to make room for more park, then where do the cars go? There's a number of options, and I actually want to dive into this more into another video because I think there's a lot to this, but let's summarize this quickly. Going up is often the only option. With this in mind, one option is to cut the parking lot to only a portion of its previous size and instead make it into a parking garage. We could potentially cut the parking lot to a third of its total footprint, but make the parking lot 3 stories tall. This would provide ample parking while making the bottom 2 floors covered, meaning that it'll be cooler for those who park down there. And by doing this, we could free up significant portions of the land to make back into park. There is one massive problem with this concept though, and that's the gatekeeper. Cedar Point couldn't push the rest of the park out without moving the gate, and they couldn't remove the gate without losing gatekeeper as the namesake ride of the park. However, the obvious solution to this is to expand outward along the sides, especially focusing on the west side. These expansions can flank into the main entrance and then serve as kind of a funnel into the main park entrance. This new funnel would be excellent as a drop-off point for off-site parking, which I'm going to make an entire video diving into the plan for off-site, but I will just tease now that I think going this route would not even be a compromise, but could honestly end up creating an even better experience for out-of-towners, with a completely redesigned park entrance that feels much more immersive. In the new parking lot space, there's plenty of room for like 2 new coasters, one of which could definitely be a low-to-the-ground launch coaster like Maverick, and the other a larger scale coaster that could make use of the long distance, or we could do a modification such as an RMC version of Blue Streak and lengthen it into this new area. We could also introduce some new thrill rides, and even something like a garden that you can walk through and enjoy, a feature that Cedar Point currently lacks due to its density. I think a great theme for this area could be centered around the gardens. If they introduced them, they could make a themed area in a sort of foresty type theme called the Village or something similar. This area could be entered primarily from the old picnic area next to the Blue Streak. So another great addition to this area could be an amphitheater or some kind of large scale show, something that other parks have the capability of doing, but Cedar Point has oddly lacked. This would fit perfectly on the other side of the parking lot, which means it could also be accessed directly from outside of the park, opening up an opportunity for concerts that don't even require park tickets, which opens up the area to a brand new revenue stream. It may not even be immediately apparent that Cedar Point has a campground on property unless you spend a lot of time back in Cedar Point Shore's parking lot, or if you camp there. But it's true that Cedar Point has a very decently sized campground with 145 campsites for guests to stay. I think this is a fantastic option for guests to have a place to stay, as it provides such a fun way to experience your vacation, being able to spend your days running around the park while still enjoying your evenings relaxing by the campfire. It can also be a cheaper option than many hotels in the area, especially the Cedar Point resorts. The Lighthouse Point Campground is absolutely something that I believe should exist. However, in our endeavor to expand the park, we have to look at all our options and really ask the question, can we maximize our space by thinking out a different solution? So when I began looking at this, I began wondering what the benefits of actually having this placed on the peninsula are. The most glaringly obvious one is that, hey idiot, it's really close to the park. And while initially I would agree, one thing to note is that there is a parking lot that separates the campground from actually getting into the park. Park goers have to walk at least a quarter of a mile, which isn't really that different than if they had driven their car into the parking lot from a hotel and parked in the parking lot. The second is the waterfront camping spots, which is an excellent selling point for someone who's really wanting to get a unique experience with their stay. So, with those two things in mind, my solution involves a bit of fun thinking. Cedar Point recently sold the property for their sports center and sports force park. However, there is a very large chunk of land that's located directly behind Sports Center, and I think that Cedar Point could arrange to retain this land during the sale, and then develop this land into a brand new campground with similar size and amenities to their current campground, or even larger. Instead of being able to walk to the park, Cedar Point would add a new ferry to the campground that would ferry park goers across the bay into the park's main entrance. In addition to this, new buses could be added that would take people as well, providing 2 new methods to enter the park and replace the existing walk across the parking lot. This introduces new park experiences for campers that previously didn't exist, while still giving them all the previous experiences they had. Now, with this newly cleared out space in the park, what are we going to do with the extra room? I think if we were to do something with the space, we should lean into the water and pick a theme that could incorporate that into it. In addition, I think our theming could focus on something that feels tightly packed, urban, and cozy. So my first thought is an area themed after the Italian coasts. Think like Monaco or the seaside town from Lucca. This would be a great place to offer high-end cuisine, new shops that could focus on fine art, or even an art gallery featuring works from both local and people from abroad, and even things like street performers. We could also introduce more rides and experiences, such as a go-kart track playing on the Monaco theme, and a compact LLM launch coaster, like the backlot stunt coaster at Kings Island, Kings Dominion, and Canada's Wonderland, could be made to race through the streets of the city like an Italian job. The new primary entrance to this area could be directly off of the area by the slingshot. Currently, a maintenance building sits in the way, but adequate space exists nearby that this building could be modified and reconfigured. So a new pathway and bridge could be added over the parking lot road that creates a new entrance into this area. And it can also provide a new entrance into the water park, making the transition between park and water park even smoother. Let's be honest, this one's a totally far-fetched idea. And while they would never do pretty much any of these ideas, this one especially is just something that's not going to be in the cards. But it's a fun idea, so let's dive in. A few years ago, Cedar Point purchased a resort called Sawmill Creek, a few miles away from Cedar Point, only about a 15-minute drive. They recently renovated this resort, which includes plenty of amenities. One of the big draws of the resort is its golf course, which takes up a large plot of land. However, one of the big advantages of this piece of property is its location directly on the water. And if Cedar Point needs to expand, and they can't just create more land on the peninsula, what if they just pulled a Disney World or Universal and just made another park? If Cedar Point were to eliminate the golf course from this property, there'd be enough empty space on the property to build an entirely new, very sizable park. And by building it from the ground up, they can incorporate all kinds of incredible theming and designs that's much harder to do when designing around existing attractions. And one of the best parts of this concept is that since the new park is facing the water, Cedar Fair could arrange for ferry services and bus services to transport people from park to park, making the Sandusky area one of the only handful of places where you could hit 2 parks in an afternoon. This would also work massively to boost your sales of Platinum Passes, which is their highest tier of pass, as pretty much anyone coming to the area would want to visit both parks. And while the resort guests would lose access to the golf course as an amenity, they would gain the, in my opinion, a much greater amenity of being now an on-site resort and being able to just basically walk across the street to the park gate. While the likelihood of any of these ideas coming to fruition is basically zero, I think it's fascinating to put on these goggles to view the world as it would be if Cedar Point were to decide to aggressively invest in expanding their parks' offerings, experiences, and themes, and finding new ways to become one of the top destinations in the world. I think there's so much untapped potential in the area, and I just love to think about how we could tap into that. There's still so much more I could cover too, such as creating completely new ways of entering the park, which you've heard me touch on briefly throughout this video. That is something that I'm going to make an entirely separate video about, diving into how Cedar Point could use its geography to its advantage to create experiences that make it extremely unique in the amusement park landscape. Stay tuned for that. But with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I want you to know that you are beautifully and wonderfully made, and you are loved, and that's the whole point. Bye guys.